This is this between us.
The number one podcast in the world.
This is just between us with your host, Camo.
All right, how's it going, everybody? My name is Chris, and this is Just Between Us. And as much as I really didn't want to talk about this again, it is what is most in the news right now, and I think it is, vitally important because of the massive campaign that has been going on this whole time to crush it, and that is, of course, talking about drugs. But not just any type of drugs, a very specific type of drugs. This is a type of drugs that I'm not going to call by its traditional name because, well, it'll undoubtedly get censored. It probably will get censored anyway, but I'm going to do my best to try and go around that. This particular drug might be something that is put into a vial and then taken out of that vial via a syringe and poked into, say, your arm or something. And this particular drug is very similar to other types of drugs that are administered in such a way, except it's completely different. It is a radically new type of drug. I'm sure you have figured out at this point what I am talking about. Just understand, going forward in this episode, I am not going to call it by a name that starts with a V. For one, it never was or is that. And for two, like I said, I would like to keep this from getting censored for as long as possible. So, anytime I refer to a particular drug, understand that is what I'm talking about. So why do I bring this up? Well, we just read the article from a few weeks back by Gregory Doyle. That genius, eloquent writer, trying to say nice things. And I happened to come across this article that I had saved long ago. This is from June 27th, 2021. It was written for Forbes by Enrique Dans. Wanted to make sure I wrote that down right. And I think it's really important to go back and read this article. It's in a way very similar to what Greg Doyle wrote, maybe a little more tame. But before we discuss the things that are currently in the news, I want to go back and read this article. Remember, this is from June 2021, and kind of see how we feel about it, knowing some of the things that we know now and are going to discuss today. So this article is titled, "What are we going to do with the anti-drug takers?" He starts, "As drug campaigns continue rolling out around the world," and again, I'm replacing a word with the word drug, just to be clear. He obviously is not writing the word drug. I am changing that just to make sure that's completely clear because I don't want to misquote him. He continues, "It is becoming clear in some countries that we have moved from a problem of supply to one of demand. A significant group of people who refuse to be drugged or who do not have their second drug, putting at risk the goal of herd immunity. Technology denialism has been studied over the years, but in a world where access to information is increasingly easy, it is unacceptable that millions of people, seemingly influenced by a small group of irresponsible idiots, have decided to endanger not only their own lives, but also the possibility of eradicating the pandemic. In short, they are breaking the rules that hold society together." So once again, as we saw with Mr. Doyle, immediately we're jumping from even saying misinformed to idiots and putting you on the outside of society. You are not part of good society. You are evil people trying to destroy society. But let's continue. "With billions of drugs now administered, what have we learned? First and foremost, that they work, and exceptionally well. No drug is 100% effective, but those developed for this disease come very close. 99.992% of drugged people completely avoid the disease. And the 0.008% who do contract it show no symptoms or suffer any complications. I want to go ahead and interject here because that claim that he just made, which we'll get to the reality of it in a minute. However, he linked an article for that claim, but what's interesting is the article that he linked, it's from May 14th, 2021 by NPR, and it's an article that says just 12 people are behind most vaccine hoaxes on social media, research shows. So it has nothing to do with the claim he made. And also, I don't see anywhere in this article where they make a reference to efficacy. Now, maybe it once had one, and they've since removed it because the efficacy that he's claiming is, we now know, absurd. Granted, this is what they originally sold you, which we now know has changed and changed many times. He also linked, under the specific claim for the 0.008% who do contract it show no symptoms or suffer any complications, he linked another article, this one to technologyreview.com, and this one at least seems to be on topic as far as the title is, Some Vaccinated People Are Still Getting COVID. Here's Why You Shouldn't Worry. Now again, this article makes absolutely no reference or claim to only 0.008% contracting, and it does not say that they suffer no symptoms or complications. So neither of these links, and see, this is something... this is why I'm pointing this out too, because this is something that's really important that is done frequently. You read a news article and they link all sort of things, or they link a study that they're making claims about that study, and 99.9% of people, and yes, I'm drawing that number out of thin air, it's obviously something other than that, but it's, I can guarantee a very high percentage never even click the links. They see the link is there, that's sufficient for them, if they even bother to see that the link is there or care. When you follow the link, often you get something like this where the link has absolutely nothing to do or backs up their claim not at all. That was an odd way to say that. Or say when you're looking at a news report about a study, and I first started noticing this years ago with climate studies, where the news article will give you, the most radical possible thing that the study might mention, even though that's not what the study is saying. And what is in the study that they're reporting on comes to a radically different conclusion than what the news article is trying to sell you. It is very important if a news article catches your attention, okay, and they're not claiming that this is originally sourced information, they're reporting on what somebody else said or what a study said. Don't bother reading the news article. Go directly to that source and see what they are saying. Because I guarantee you, 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, you will come out with a very different thought than if you were to read the news article. This is extremely important. Because like I just said, he made 2 very specific claims. 99.992% of drugged people completely avoid the disease. The link for that goes nowhere. It is completely irrelevant. It does not mention it whatsoever. Then he says the 0.008% who do contract it show no symptoms or suffer any complications. The link for that offers no backing up to this claim, and while it's somewhat relevant, makes no mention of 0.008% or no symptoms or complications. So his sources for those claims are bogus. And we know that those original claims to begin with were bogus anyway. But it's important to understand that we know that now, a year, 2 years later, but you could have learned that then on June 27th, 2021, when this article was written, by checking his sources. They're right there. They're linked right there. Anyway, let's continue. In other words, he says, the vast majority of deaths from this disease now occur among undrugged people. So now with this claim, we know that the CDC no longer reports that that's the case, that it's actually the drugged portion of the population that is the majority of deaths. But as I reported way back when, probably around this time, it was never verifiably the case. So the link that he has for this one does in fact go to an article that makes this claim. It's an AP News article, and it says nearly all disease deaths in U.S. are now among unvaccinated. They claim only about 150 of the more than 18,000 disease deaths in May were in fully vaccinated people, which translates to about 0.8% or 5 deaths a day on average. They make a very important note, however. It says, the AP analyzed figures provided by the CDC. The CDC itself has not estimated what percentage of hospitalizations and deaths are in fully drugged people, citing limitations in data. Among them, only about 45 states report breakthrough infections, and some are more aggressive than others in looking for such cases. So the data probably understates such infections. So they're telling you right there that we found, 5? I think they said we found 5. No, 150. We found 150 deaths. But they're probably severely underreported. There's also a note at the bottom that says the story was first published June 24th, 2021, and it was updated June 29th. Originally, they made a claim that there were 700,000 more hospitalizations than there actually were, and the percentage of hospitalizations of people who have been drugged was only 0.1%, and they updated it to 1.1%, which sounds minuscule, except that's a 10 times error rate. It's pretty big. Aside from the fact that what they fail to mention in this article, and what I was reporting at the time, was hospitals were instructed no longer to record drug status. If somebody was drugged, they weren't to record that. So, as far as the data was concerned, it considered virtually everybody as undrugged, even if they were. And then you also have the issue of were they single drugged or fully drugged and boosted, all of which drastically further complicates the data. Now, I can't claim that it was the opposite, and I'm not trying to claim that it was the opposite. What I'm claiming is that the data cannot bear out what is being claimed here. And it is entirely inaccurate to make the claim that they are making. And this is also a big problem with the same issue with news articles that I was talking about just a minute ago, which is frequently, instead of journalists going to the source and originally sourcing their information, as should have been done here, granted this is an opinion piece, so I'll give him that. However, he's not using sources from his own news organization that he would have firsthand knowledge of being somewhat verifiable, maybe. He's using an AP source. And I'm sorry, for as high esteem as people hold AP, I've found just as many flaws with AP as anybody else. And there's no exceptions being made here. I'm not making an exception for Fox News. I'm not making an exception for even some of the offhand, non-mainstream news sites, because they all do this, where they report on someone else's report who reported on someone else's report. He shouldn't be linking the AP here. He should be linking the CDC. The reason he didn't link the CDC was because the AP made a claim based on their own analyzation of the CDC that the CDC refused to claim in the first place because they don't have sufficient data. You see the issue with that? This is something that was an issue prior to the pandemic. But the pandemic absolutely exploded this problem, and it has only continued since then, if not gotten worse. It's ironic that all the rerees on Twitter, to use a Chad Prather term, always the first thing they say, source. Can't be right unless you can provide a source that doesn't have firsthand knowledge anyway. We'll all use these mainstream news articles that are not sourced correctly in the first place. I learned about this stuff in middle school and then again in high school, how to correctly source a paper. And the news articles were not sources. And even if you put a news article that links a direct source, you should go to that direct source yourself and not take the spin of the news article. What about you? Did you learn this stuff in school? Like I said, I learned this at least by 7th grade. And then it was further drilled into me in high school. And I'm glad it was. Or I might not have spotted any of this, and I might be reporting to you entirely different information than I am right now. And this is the problem, too. I know I'm getting way off track here. We'll get back to the article in just a second. But this is the problem with public school. And I know that's way out there, but the teaching to... So I attended private schools mostly until 8th grade, and then I went to a public high school. And even though I'm telling you I learned this in public high school, which is good, I'm pretty positive they probably don't teach that anymore, because public schools teach you what to learn, not how to learn. And private school, I'm not going to say did a great job at teaching me how to learn, not what to learn, but it did a better job. Public school is set up to create good citizens for the government, not intelligent people. And we used to have college for that. But ever since college and federal government have gotten so intertwined, I think we can all, whether we're on the left or the right, reasonably say that the quality of a college education has gone down while the price has skyrocketed. And you can point to a very specific point in time, at the very least, where the price skyrocketed, which was when the federal government started backing the loans. And I would also say that while it might have been going down prior to that, it took a sharper dip down at that point as well. But anyway, let's get back to the article. So he says, in other words, the vast majority of deaths from this disease now occur in undrugged people. That fact alone should be enough to convince you, the drug denialists, to abandon their bizarre theories. That fact alone should be enough to convince... That fact alone should be enough to convince the drug denialists to abandon their bizarre theories. You're more likely to die if you aren't drugged. Which he again links, this time to MarketWatch. MarketWatch reporting on the same Associated Press article that is analyzing CDC data that, again, the CDC refused to analyze itself, claiming it had insufficient data. What's interesting, though, is this MarketWatch version of the reporting on this AP article still has the incorrect numbers of about 0.1% and 853,000 disease hospitalizations instead of the actual number, which was about 107,000. So, while at the time this is probably what it said, this has since been updated, which further shows you why this reporting on reporting is BS. Because if you were to go look for this information from about this time and you were to find this article, you wouldn't know that the AP updated this article. To mention the fact, the CDC did not make these claims. They made these claims all on their own, even though the CDC said there was insufficient data, and that the AP updated their claims to about 10 times different than what they originally claimed. And that, in a nutshell, is part of the problem here. I know, I keep hammering this, but it's so important. Let's see if we can finish this article. I'm going to get back to it again. Okay. But if you needed more evidence, look at this. Thanks to drugs, hospital capacity is no longer threatened. How can denialists explain this fact? Look, I'm going to do you a favor and not go through this yet again, because it's much more of the same. He links a Hill article this time, The Hill. I will link this article, of course, with the episode. So if you're interested, you can go through there. But the article doesn't claim that. I mean, it does sort of make that claim, but it offers no evidence to back that up. It just says that there's a decoupling between the two, which is a completely unprovable thing. Hospitals always operate over 90% capacity. And while, yes, there was an increase in people going to the hospital, and early on there was a lot of people in the ICU because of improper treatment, including using a drug called remdesivir, which has now, there's a lot of questions surrounding that now, let's just say, that may have been contributing to, as well as shoving people on ventilators when they probably shouldn't have been. I'm not holding anybody accountable for that. We were doing what we thought was right to begin with. I'm willing to take that on its face. We know now that that was the absolute incorrect thing to do, but we did not necessarily have that information then, to the best of my knowledge. But anyway, I'll just point out, remember the fact that in my home state of Washington, they had set up, I think it was 10,000 emergency beds at, I think it was the Seahawks, the Seattle NFL team stadium. They had set up 10,000 extra beds. Not a single one was ever used. Remember, they made a big deal of bringing that Navy ship into New York Harbor full of extra beds. Not a single one was ever used. As well as they did that in California somewhere, I think. There were several places across the country where extra beds were set up, and virtually none were used, and absolutely none were needed. Now, again, I'm not trying to claim that the drug didn't reduce hospitalizations to some degree or another. It very well may have. All I'm claiming is that they cannot make the claim that they are making. But I will continue rather than go any deeper into that. He continues to say, drugs don't make you magnetic, and if anybody dumb enough to believe the trick of sticking a teaspoon against sweaty skin should seriously consider seeing a psychologist. Look, I don't believe that either. I know most people didn't. I believe it was probably a hoax to begin with, especially when you're talking about the teaspoon thing, because it's fairly easy to do that. However, I do know that there are some people that tested that a little further than trying to stick, a teaspoon to their skin, and are absolutely convinced that that's the case. Whether or not that's true, I cannot verify at all. Are they just trying to get views online? Entirely possible. As far as the totality of information here, it's certainly not the angle I would go with. And suffice to say, certainly conservatives, but absolutely Democrats and people on the left as well. It's a problem with the entire U.S. population, not one side or the other, but I would like to see conservatives do a little better at this. Don't jump on everything you see. Everybody does it. Everybody wants to believe something that aligns with their confirmation bias. Take a step back and give it a little time. I'm not making any excuses for anybody that made that claim without any sort of substantiation, but let's just keep that in mind going forward. He continues, nor do they contain microchips, not only because there are no microchips small enough to be administered by injection, but because the drugs come in multi-dose vials. Now, he's making a little bit of a sleight of hand here because while some people might have used the term microchips, what was actually being discussed was RFID chips, which are, in fact, small enough to be administered by injection. They make them very, 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 very tiny. Again, do I believe that they're in there? No, not necessarily. And do I believe they could have been? Absolutely. It could be done if you wanted to. I don't believe that it was. I'm just saying it could be. What would be interesting to note, because again, with another sleight of hand here with the multi-dose vials claim, is whether or not special syringes were given for specific, for these specific drugs. Because generally, from what I understand, and I could be incorrect about this, but from what I understand, when they are introducing a RFID chip via that method, it's something that is contained in the syringe, obviously not sucked in through a liquid. Now, again, that doesn't mean anything. I'm just saying he's pulling a little bit of sleight of hand here to make you seem absolutely ridiculous for even thinking that's a possibility, when in fact they have done it. There's been many reports on it. And I'm not saying they've done it unwillingly to the public population. I'm just saying that the technology absolutely exists, and it's certainly possible. Whether it's been done, I doubt it. But it is entirely possible. So while, it might be more ridiculous to consider the magnetic thing because of the minuscule amount of metal that is in typical drugs like this, this is not such this is not the same as believing in UFOs. This technology absolutely exists. It's absolutely out there, and it's been around for a while. It's not, it's not an unknown thing. Nonetheless, he continues. Another myth is that the drugs are experimental. Wrong. They have been exhaustively tested. Nor do they modify our DNA. They do not cross the nucleus membrane. Instead, they are an extraordinary success story achieved in record time. While I believe it's an interesting success story in record time, they don't modify your DNA, but they do generate modified DNA within you. That's how they work. That's what they do. And making the claim that they're not experimental is just as wrong or just as unprovable as saying that they are. They absolutely are experimental. Prior to them being emergency authorized, they were entirely experimental. Yes, they had been tested, but they were still in testing phases, which, as far as I'm concerned, by definition means experimental. And they didn't go through a traditional authorization process. So one can just as reasonably say that they're still experimental because they didn't go through a typical authorization process and still haven't to this day, as you could make the argument because they went through the emergency authorization process, they're no longer experimental. Is it a debate worth having? Maybe, maybe not, but claiming either way could be true. He continues, proof that the science can solve our most complex problems, and above all, an extraordinary advance for the future where they will be used to cure a wide variety of diseases of all kinds, including malaria, cancer, and many cardiovascular problems. Well, that's a pretty big promise. We are talking about a technology, messenger RNA, which is surprisingly simple to mass produce and which is going to change the world as we know it. Why would anybody oppose technology that could save their life? Skipping one paragraph to the end here in the interest of time, he, and again, I'll link the article, so if you think that I'm skipping this just to whatever, you can see it. Doesn't change anything. But he ends the article with saying, as always happens with denialism, the arguments are exposed as false as time goes by. But in the case of the pandemic, time is precisely what we don't have. Denialism must be tackled, isolated, and neutralized. Boy, that sounds like violent language, doesn't it? Anyway, as the uncivil and unacceptable behavior it is. You know, I really wanted to give him a little bit more credit because while he did start off with idiots at the top, I wanted to give him a little more credit than Mr. Doyle, but he just had to end it like that. So, to use his words, which obviously I don't agree with, but why would anyone be willing to be so uncivil and unacceptable when it comes to this drug? Well, we went through some of that, including why the man who invented messenger RNA technology opposes it himself. But what are some other reasons, perhaps? How about the waning efficacy? Or how about the fact that we know that breakthrough, quote-unquote breakthrough cases are as common or more common in drugged people than in undrugged people? How about the fact that the worst 2 years for COVID cases and deaths were after the drug came out and not before? How about the fact that just today, or maybe it was yesterday, matter of fact, let's check real quick and get an exact date on that. And I'm glad I did, because this was actually January 13th, 2023. I just became aware of it last night. But the CDC issued an alert stating that there was a safety signal raised in one of their systems for risk of persons 65 years and older for stroke from the Pfizer BioNTech version of the drug. They say there was no risk raised for the Moderna version, and that this is continuing going forward. That they're going to continue to investigate it going forward. We know that studies in other countries have shown risk associations as well. And we know that the reporting to VAERS for adverse events is more than all other injection-type drugs combined in history. And when I say injection-type drugs, I'm specifically talking about these things, not necessarily anything, any drug that could possibly be injected. I just want to make that clear. I know I've been using this terminology now for an hour and, 30 minutes, and hopefully you've caught on. But just making that clear one more time. Or, and also I will link this CDC alert. The reason I'm not reading it to you directly is because it's obviously littered with words that I'm trying not to say right now. So I will link it for you. It is not a study that says there absolutely is. It is just saying that there have been notifications of this issue and that they're looking into it, basically. However, we know, we've talked about we talked about this the last time around. So let's look at some other reasons why some people might. How did he put that? Why would anybody oppose a technology that could save their life? Let's look at another reason. By now, you've probably all heard at least some version of this little gem of audio right here.
Pfizer ultimately is thinking about mutating COVID?
Well, that is not what we say to the public. No, don't tell anyone this. You gotta probably don't tell anyone. You gotta probably don't tell anyone. Okay? We're exploring, no, you know how the virus keeps mutating?
Yeah.
Well, one of the things we're exploring is why don't we just mutate it ourselves so we could create undoubtedly develop new vaccines, right? So we have to do that. If we're gonna do that, though, there's a risk of as you could imagine, no one wants to be having a pharma company mutating viruses. To be very controlled to make sure that this virus that you mutate doesn't create something that goes everywhere.
Something crazy.
Is the way that the virus started and moving on. To be honest, it makes no sense if this virus comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, I know.
Meet Jordan Tristan Walker, a director of research and development strategic operations and mRNA scientific planning at Pfizer.
So, that was James O'Keefe explaining to you who that was in the video. You heard two people, an undercover reporter. I don't know if he's an official reporter. I mean, this is what made him a reporter, obviously. Project Veritas is who recorded this video. And they frequently do this where they have people volunteer to go undercover and do these things. So I don't know if he was a reporter to begin with or if he just volunteered to do this. But he was talking to a Jordan Tristan Walker who works for Pfizer or worked for Pfizer. I don't know if he still does. And he was he believed he was on a date with this guy and was telling him all about his job at Pfizer and things that Pfizer is doing behind the scenes. Now, he claims that Pfizer was working on or talking about working on directed evolution, which is just a fancy term for gain of function, which basically means that they want to take the virus and mutate it and mutate it and mutate it, trying to match mutations that are going to happen in the real world so that they can create drugs for those mutations before those mutations happen in the real world. Obviously, there's some big issues with that. A lot of people have covered that more in depth and are a lot more knowledgeable on the laws and stuff regarding this. I think we all agree that whether or not, if Pfizer is doing this or if Pfizer is even talking about doing this, I think we can all agree that it's not a good idea to have private companies mutating dangerous diseases. The left has spent an incredible amount of time telling us just how dangerous this disease is, and yet seem to not be concerned at all about this happening. Now, there's a lot of stuff surrounding this. So this is what I was leading into, and this is why I read you that Forbes article to begin with, okay? As kind of a way to compare where we are now from where we were then. And these people that were so sure of themselves, now are, because, and see, this is the problem with people that tend to make it into these industries, including the one I'm, now a part of myself by making this podcast, and that is ego. And whether it's intentional or unintentional. And that is an inability to admit when you're wrong, because this now leaves Enrique, who wrote the Forbes article, Enrique Dans, in the position where he kind of has two options. One, he can do the right thing. And while I'm not saying that, based on the information he had at the time, okay, he believed what he believed. He believed the information he had was right. We've gone through why, even at the time, he could have figured out that information was not entirely correct. But now, knowing that it pretty much none of it's correct, he could admit his wrongdoing and either apologize, which I would think personally for myself would be necessary had I made an article like that, or at least correct the faults and change his position a little bit. Or what the vast majority choose to do, which is double down and triple down and quadruple down, now run cover for companies like Pfizer, and either ignore these things or try to claim that they're lies. And that's where we're at now. Well, no, that's where we were at for the last couple days. So this broke several days ago. And some interesting things have happened since then, and that's my biggest issue with this. This story is actually extremely significant in a way I haven't heard anybody talking about yet. There have been some before it, and there'll probably be some after it, that accomplish what this story accomplishes, but never one so immediately recognizable, let's say. So naturally, when Project Veritas released this information, in the form of the video you just heard a clip of. The first reaction was denial, of course, by the people that, don't tend to believe these things, let's just say. It mostly started with denying that this Jordan Tristan, I can't remember. I know it's a little bit funny in the way it's pronounced. Walker worked for Pfizer. They were looking at, that he had only recently got his doctorate. It wasn't that recent, but recent for a doctor. I think it was 2018. And so the fact that he would be in this position is absurd, and anything they could come up with to say that this was not true, that this was just, I don't know, I guess a setup with actors portraying this. And on the surface, it looked like there was maybe some reasoning behind that, because at least, by the time I saw it, which was several hours after it had broken, there was no apparent information available, nothing quickly found. Generally doctors have listings on several websites and pretty hefty LinkedIn profiles, things of that nature. There was nothing that could be immediately found that positively identified this man, let alone positively identified him as working for Pfizer. However, pretty shortly after, Project Veritas posted a supposedly an internal piece of information from Pfizer that showed Jordan Tristan Walker as employed in the position that the man in the video claimed. There were people that argued, I think it was spelling maybe, or the way his position was listed. No, it wasn't even spelling. It was the way his position was listed, I think. As well as many people that eventually started posting screenshots of his LinkedIn profile and stuff. And we know that the media companies do this. We know that particularly online media companies do this. Social media, Google, YouTube, same thing, Amazon, and they run cover, and they immediately pull the profiles of these people and all of that. Well, there was now evidence surfacing of this, that he had a LinkedIn profile that showed that he worked for Pfizer, and that was pulled. That there was other websites and information. People were finding his graduation and stuff that proved that he was a doctor, or had a doctorate, I should say, among other things, right? So it started to look as if, yeah, he was an employee. So why was all this information gone? Why was it all pulled down and hidden when it was pretty easily verifiable prior to that being hidden? And it seemed as if they were going to run the course of denial and saying that he was not. Plenty of left-wing journalists and stuff were posting that it was BS and where's the proof and all of that, because they like to pretend that media and companies like Google and stuff don't run this kind of interference when it's blatantly obvious that they do. Nonetheless, that's where we were. And so in an effort to, well, I assume partially in a sarcastic effort, but in an effort to get the truth out of Pfizer, Project Veritas pulled a little stunt while this interference of removing, any trace of Jordan Tristan Walker and his connection with Pfizer from the internet was happening. And this clip comes from a show called The Absolute Truth with Emerald Robinson. Now, I'm not entirely familiar with that show, so I did, I independently verified the information that you're going to hear in this clip, and actually the clip following that. I just want to go ahead and make that clear. You know, anything that's about to be claimed here, you will be able to verify for yourself with a quick Google search, as I separately verified too. I'm just using this clip because it happens to work with what I'm doing here. But so if you have a bone to pick with that particular show or whatever, all I can tell you is that these two clips are in fact accurate. And of course, that credit is owed to the Absolute Truth show with Emerald Robinson for these clips.
No doubt that Pfizer has some serious questions that need to be answered, and the good folks at Project Veritas aren't letting them off easy. Yesterday, Project Veritas rented a LED truck and parked it right outside of Pfizer's world headquarters in Manhattan.
So, as she stated, they took, calling it an LED truck is a little bit of an understatement. It's basically one of those big billboard trucks with massive LED billboards all the way around, demanding that Pfizer answer to this video. And I think this was a brilliant move by James O'Keefe, because had they not done this, I think it would have been much easier for Pfizer to keep their heads down and, buy a little time, let the interference that's being run play out, and then they can deny. So let's go ahead and go back to this show, The Absolute Truth with Emerald Robinson, and see how they responded.
Well, Pfizer waited until 8 p.m. on a Friday night to release a response to Project Veritas's report. In part, they claim, quote, in the ongoing development of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine, Pfizer has not conducted gain-of-function or directed evolution research. Fact-based information rooted in sound science is vitally important to overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic, and Pfizer remains committed to transparency and helping alleviate the devastating burden of this disease.
Okay, so as she said, that was part of the response. She basically read you the beginning and the end, the section in the center that she took out just to make sure that you have the context, is them outlining what they claim that they do with the, and that what they do is required by U.S. and global regulators, is done in a biosafety level 3 laboratory and is done by many companies and academic institutions in the U.S. and around the world. So essentially deny. Now, they're not denying that they're doing some work, obviously, like I just said, but they're denying the core of the allegation, which is that they're doing gain-of-function research, or as Jordan put it, directed evolution research on this disease. But importantly, what they didn't say was an employee or former employee. And this is my huge concern with this. I'm going to go ahead and say you'll have to forgive me. I had to step away for a while to take care of something, and so I've had a little trouble getting back into this here and staying focused. So if I already said that, I apologize. I'm trying to, get back into the mindset here and regain all my thoughts. But this is what's important to me here, and that is the clear demonstration of the effectiveness of this censorship. Pfizer did not admit that Jordan was an employee. Now, the evidence is out there at this point that's pretty difficult to deny. But I think they're going to try still anyway. At the very least, what they're not going to do is say it themselves. There is no doubt in my mind that he is and was an employee of Pfizer. Whether or not he was telling the truth, I can't say that. I don't know. He might have been telling the truth. He might have been, BSing a date that he was on because he believed he was on a date. But this censorship is both extremely apparent in this scenario and effective. And I think that that's very important to notice. And I think that it's may not be recognized for it right now, but I think one day we will recognize this particular case as a pivotal moment in this censorship, what would you call it, situation? I don't know. Because this is becoming a pattern now. I mean, it's been a pattern for some time, but it's becoming more and more apparent. They're less concerned about you recognizing it. Or maybe we're just getting better at recognizing it. I'm not entirely sure. But it's no longer, there was no reason whatsoever to censor his social medias and stuff. There was no reason to pull his connection to Pfizer from the internet. There was no reason to wipe the internet of Jordan Tristan Walker. Unless you're working to cover for Pfizer. If he was full of it, then there would be no need to wipe all of his information because we would be able to look into him and see, okay, he's probably full of it. In my opinion, and looking throughout history, the people that tell you the most, that they are trying to combat mis and disinformation are generally the ones creating the mis and disinformation, which is what's been going on here. I don't think there's any doubt about that anymore. I used to try to walk these lines in order to kind of keep the podcast, and I know this is kind of ironic to say because I am walking the line today in order to keep the podcast not censored, of not saying the name of this drug, and trying, some of the clips have mentioned the name of the disease and stuff, but I'm trying not to say it myself, so it's not pulled down instantly because of it. It's just something I have to do because I'm trying to gain a following. If I already had one, I probably wouldn't worry about it as much, but of course that's easy to say now. But I used to try to walk this line and act like these unprovable things didn't exist, at least until a time where they were undoubtedly provable. Now, I think there's a preponderance of evidence out there that makes them quite obvious, but can I necessarily prove it, in a court of law with beyond a reasonable doubt type sense? Maybe not. I don't know. I've never really sat down and tried, but I'm not going to do that anymore, and I've stopped doing that because it's silly. If the average person can take a look at it and go, okay, obviously this guy had a Facebook page and a LinkedIn page and some other, probably a Google Scholar page type thing, things along those lines, right, today. And then this news breaks about him the next day, and by that night, all of those things don't exist. Clearly, somebody's running interference here. What's the purpose of running that interference? Well, the only purpose that one can really surmise and credibly back up is that they are running interference for Pfizer. Because again, if you wanted to say, oh, well, we weren't sure that this was verifiable information at the time, so we took away all the information that would make it verifiable. That doesn't make any sense. Realistically, someone please make the argument to me how you could say that there is a good reason why they would run this interference, and I'll entertain it, and if I think that it's credible, I'll share it. But I don't see one. So, and then there's so many other situations. There's hundreds of situations going back. At least, I'm only aware of so much because I'm fairly young and fairly new into politics. I've been doing this for more than a decade now, so not that new. But as far as, I don't know all the way back to Reagan and Clinton and stuff. I've seen certain things, but I wasn't there for the day-to-day. I have been engaged in this stuff day-to-day since the election of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. So I know that at least that long, this sort of interference has been happening. And it's only grown. Historically, I can't say whether or not there's been as much interference. What I tend to believe based off of what I know is that there was less intentional interference, but by the nature of such a limited medium of, say, newspapers and television, there was probably a relatively equal amount of interference, just not nearly as much intentionally. But that's just the way it was, in order to, you could unintentionally run interference quite, just by not covering something because there was such a limited number of people covering something. That's not the case anymore. I mean, I sort through hundreds of different news sources and, among other sources every single week. Sometimes it feels like easily in a day. Just depends. But so anyway, I just wanted to I just wanted to bring attention to that aspect of this because it's kind of happening in the background. Obviously, the main news is that Pfizer might be doing this or had been intending to do this directed evolution, as well as with the CDC admitting that there may be some connection with the drug and strokes in people over the age of 65. One would like to hope that this might be the floodgates opening on Pfizer, but I highly doubt it. But nonetheless, this being happening in the background, this covering for Pfizer and for Jordan, I just wanted to make sure that that aspect was addressed. So let's take a really short break here and come back. I've got a little bit, quite a bit different story for you when we come back. And then also, right before we end today, I think I'm going to give you my thoughts on Tyree Nicholes and that situation, given that it has been also so prevalent over the last week. Okay, hopefully I can get things together a little bit better here since there's not so many thoughts swirling around in my head about this situation. This is entirely unrelated and irrelevant to everything. I just thought it was kind of an interesting story and something I kind of wanted to talk about. This is another story that I have taken from over my break, so this could have happened anytime in the last 6 months or so. It was fairly recent, but I'm guessing it was somewhere again in that kind of 6-week range. But this is from Miami. The story comes from NBC News, and I'm going to go ahead and read this article to you. It's very short. Miami firefighter said he had no regrets after punching handcuffed patient on camera. Now, obviously, I'm laughing at the no regrets part, not the punching the handcuffed patient part. Reading the headline, obviously, this sounds terrible, but let's dig into this a little bit. Miami authorities have suspended a firefighter who said he had no regrets after video captured him punching a handcuffed patient who he said spat on him in October. Quote, "If he never knew the consequences of spitting in a grown man's face, then consider my actions public education and this video a PSA," Robert Webster told NBC Miami on Tuesday. Webster, who was a lieutenant with the Miami Department of Fire and Rescue, told the station he is not remorseful for attacking a handcuffed patient on October 15th in the emergency room at Jackson Memorial Hospital. Webster could not immediately be reached by NBC for comment Wednesday. A representative with the Fire Rescue Department said in a statement that the firefighter was relieved of duty pending an investigation. The City of Miami Department of Fire and Rescue was made aware of a video released of an incident involving a Miami firefighter, the statement said. When this incident occurred, the individual was immediately relieved of duty. Our department is conducting an administrative investigation while this individual remains in relieved of duty status. That was a whole lot of repetitiveness. NBC Miami reported that the video, which had no audio, lasted about 40 seconds. The station identified the handcuffed patient as Antonio Cruz. NBC Miami obtained a police report which it reported said Cruz was, quote, agitated and screaming to the rescue personnel. The station also reported that Cruz had consumed cocaine and heroin. The video shows someone who appears to be Cruz spitting in Webster's direction. Webster then, according to the video, rushes at Cruz and appears to punch him at least twice before other people restrain him. NBC News does not know what preceded the video or whether it was edited. Well, I'm assuming that the security cam footage was not 40 seconds, so it was probably edited. Miami police did not immediately respond to email questions about the incident, the video, and the police report. Wednesday, it was not clear whether Webster or Cruz had been criminally charged. Now, before I get to my actual point about this, I want to point out, since we've talked about this several times in this episode, that this is what passes for reporting these days. First of all, there was a ton of repetitiveness in this 2 or 3 paragraphs, okay? This could have been said with a lot less. But also, you have a very inflammatory headline, which I understand. You know, I go back and forth on this. Everybody hates clickbait. But at the same time, news has always done this because they want you to read their publication, right? So I go back and forth on this, but this is an extremely inflammatory headline, which I don't appreciate that they always swing negatively towards, say, the fire department or police in particular. This is not a police incident, and that's going to be important here in a second. But, you know, then you get down into the article and you find out a little bit more, and then you find out that they basically have no information on this other than the video. In which case, just present the video and don't add all this other stuff to it. But I think this is another example of some very, very poor reporting. Especially since there has been quite a bit of time. I can see now this was December 14th, 2022. This was reported, so a little over a month ago. There's been a lot of time to update this, yet nothing. But nonetheless, I am going to go ahead and tell you something that nobody else, I can almost guarantee, on the news will. This firefighter not only deserves to be reinstated, he deserves an award. Why do I say that? Well, in general, you've heard me advocate before that public government employees in general need to be held to a higher standard than the general public. Absolutely. And in particular, police, because police have the ability and the power to arrest you. Firefighters do not. Firefighters' only job is to help you. Police's job is partially to help you, but they also have a lot of authority above that, and therefore I believe, while in general I support the police, I do believe they have a duty to be held to a higher standard. And we're going to talk about the Tyree Nicholes situation here in a minute. But this firefighter's job is strictly to help you. And I agree 100% with what he said. I want to read his quote one more time. If he never knew the consequences of spitting in a grown man's face, then consider my actions public education and this video a PSA. Couldn't agree more. This guy was high on, heroin and cocaine or something? It was cocaine and something. He was acting belligerently. There's no other way to put it. And he was handcuffed on the gurney, but you wouldn't really be able to tell the way he was flinging himself around. And he spit in his face. At that point, no matter who you are, it's not even necessarily a decision to return that with a punch. It's just a reaction. And this is a very important lesson that is not learned enough anymore, in part because of the internet, in part because of the way we raise children these days, that there are lines that you do not cross, and there are lines that one man does not cross with another man, or it is met with action. And I think that we need to make those boundaries clearer again. Now, had this been a police officer, I would probably have the same opinion for this situation. That does not mean I would have it in every situation with the police officer, because there are, there's different circumstances. But in this situation, I honestly don't care who it is, but especially that it was a firefighter who was merely there to help this guy because he was high out of his mind and a danger to himself. I couldn't agree more. If you spit in a grown man's face, now you know what's going to happen. Simple as that. And rather than excoriation, I would like to very quickly give this firefighter a round of applause. All right. Now with that, let's take a slightly more serious turn to the Tyree Nicholes situation. Now, I am not going to get into the situation at all. I'm sure most of you are aware at this point. Just, super surface level. Tyree Nicholes was pulled over by the police, I believe, originally for reckless driving. He was then they attempted to arrest him. He got up and fled briefly, and then they tackled him. This was 5 police officers in Memphis, and they beat him to some degree while arresting him, and then, from my understanding, beat him further after he was handcuffed. I say to my understanding because I watched one of the videos. I believe there was 3 out. I did not watch all 3. Normally on a situation like this, I would be, I would do a deep dive on it and cover every angle. This one was pretty well covered, and I didn't, I was busy doing other things, so I didn't get around on this one. I did want to make a comment, though, and this is going to make me very, wildly unpopular. But I think it's important to note. Now, obviously, anything that took place after Tyree Nicholes was restrained, there's absolutely no excuse for. I also have been very clear before that there is way too much of an excess in traffic violation stops and a practice of extrapolating small crimes into large crimes, generally from traffic stops and all of those things. So understand when I say this without caveating 1,000 things, that I have been clear about these things before. You can go back and listen if you're very, interested on my opinions on this. I am not excusing the police in this matter. That's not what I'm doing. But it does need to be said. 2 things. 1, we have to remember the context that this is Memphis, Tennessee, where this is taking place, which I don't know if it is still, but at one point I believe was the most dangerous city in the country. It is still one of the most dangerous cities in the country. Its crime index is literally 0. It is 0% safe. There's more than 15,000 violent crimes per year. 25 out of every 1,000 residents, a little over 25 out of every 1,000 residents experience a violent crime every year, and a little over 80 of every resident experience a crime every year. There's 1 in 600 people are murdered in Memphis every year. This is a very dangerous place. I'd also like to point out, like many other very dangerous cities in the country, that it has been Democrat-controlled for at least 30 years. Possibly more, but in Memphis, their previous charter did not allow partisan. So I'm not quite as clear prior to 1991. Nonetheless, I think that's important to note because it seems that a lot of these problems are coming out of cities that have long been controlled by a particular party. But this is a very dangerous place. This is absolutely the type of place where a traffic stop turns into a double homicide of police officers. It's not uncommon in a place like Memphis. So I think that is relevant. Again, none of this is a justification for what happened to Tyree Nicholes, but it needs to be, it's part of the context. And in situations like this, we have to accurately address all of these nuances that do in fact matter. This is what makes this different from if it happened in, say, I don't know, one of the safest cities in the country, right? That would change dynamics a little bit, just like many other factors, okay? Also, from the video that I saw, and again, I did not deep dive on this particular situation, so there may be some context that I am missing. I don't believe so, but there may be. So he was pulled over for reckless driving. Now, normally I'd have a beef about that, but reckless driving is a fairly serious offense. So if he was in fact reckless driving, there's certainly nothing wrong about that, him being pulled over for it. It's not like going 5 over, right? It's not like not wearing your seatbelt. You are actively putting other people at risk if that was in fact the case. And I don't know if it was or not. I did not see, there was no evidence presented as to whether or not he was. Nor is it necessarily relevant to what ultimately happened. But it is, again, part of that broader nuance and context. Now they pull him out of the car, and he immediately begins to, not fight, but struggle. He's pulling away. He's trying to get away. He's certainly not complying. And I know there's a lot of argument about, complying and not complying and all of that. But it's nonetheless a fact of this situation. Okay. He gets up and tries to run away before he is then tackled and more aggressively arrested this time, including some punches and a beating to some degree. Now, if it stopped right there, my ultimate opinion of this situation would probably be different. And I know that is what is going to make this an extremely unpopular opinion. But the fact is, I just don't see, it's one thing if the police are entirely in the wrong to pull you over, entirely in the wrong to arrest you, entirely in the wrong from the minute they start, and you choose to not comply, and they escalate it to the point of death. And there's no reason, again, I keep saying this, but I want to be clear. There is no reason this should have escalated to the point of death. That's not what I'm saying. This isn't an excuse. But that is a little bit different of a situation. If you're going to choose not to comply because you believe you're not in the wrong, you better be damn sure you're not in the wrong, I guess is what I'm trying to say there. Now, once he was restrained or detained, or both, however you want to say it, now there's no excuse, no matter what the situation, right? For continuing to beat him, to subdue him. He's already subdued. There's absolutely no excuse there. So I want to be clear, as far as the outcome of this, I'm not saying that the charges don't deserve to be brought up, that they shouldn't have been fired, or any of that. I believe in this case, it's absolutely justified. I'm just saying, when it comes to preventing these things in the future, this is part of the conversation. As much as you don't like it, the police can be in the wrong, and Tyree Nicholes could have been in the wrong to some degree. That does not justify what happened after he was detained. But it does explain it to some degree. Take that how you want to take it. You can call me a monster. You can call me an asshole. You can call me a bootlicker. You can call me whatever else you want. I am certainly nobody that is one to blindly submit to authority or to, you know, I am no purveyor of it. I don't even know if that's the right word, but these things, you know, it is important to have law and order in society, for sure. You can't have a functional society without it. So we have to be able to address all of the wrongs, no matter where they are, what side, or who is most wrong. You also have to be able to address the rest of it too. And I just wanted to point that out. I think that, you know, nonetheless, I believe that what happened to him was absolutely horrible. I believe that these officers deserve 100% to be held accountable and to see trial and their day in court for what they did to him. And I'm glad that that's going to happen. My concern, though, in part, you know, absolutely part of my concern is ensuring that when officers exceed their authority, they're held accountable. Great, but that is happening. We also need to make sure that these things don't continue to happen. And to do that, we have to look at every aspect. I also want to say that I very much, I support and very much am heartened, I guess, by his family taking a strong stand in not, you know, in not encouraging further destruction because of what happened here, in allowing the system to seek justice here. I think that takes a lot of courage and a lot of restraint. I could only imagine, you know, it's easy to talk about these things. It's a lot easier. It's not easy, but it's easier to talk about these things when you're not directly involved. But if it was my family member, you know, all sorts of irrational emotions can take hold. And so I just, you know, would like to issue my respect for them and for the way that they've handled this. Certainly better than some situations have been handled in the past. And I think that this is how we, you know, this is also how we correct these things moving forward. So with that, let me know your thoughts. I'm sure I'm going to get plenty of hate for leaving that off how I did. Hopefully, you know, I don't really care what that, you know, there's going to be people that have a problem no matter what I say. I don't really care about those people. Hopefully, the majority of you can understand where I'm coming from and what I'm saying, and that it's not a defense of the officer's actions in any way, shape, or form. But nonetheless, let me know how you feel. You can send me an email, jbu@usa.com. You can find us on Twitter, twitter.com/JBU_show, facebook.com/JBU show. And you can find all the podcasts at anchor.fm/JBU. We're also on Rumble. We're on YouTube. We should be on Apple Podcasts. I know we're on Spotify. If you can't find us somewhere, we're on Stitcher as well. If you can't find us somewhere that you like to listen to shows like this, please let me know, and I will make sure that we get there. If you like the show, of course, like it, share it, tell people about it. And with that, I think I'm going to end it there. So my name is Chris, and at least for now, this has been Just Between Us.
Bye. Wait, I can want to be a little bit louder.
Yeah.
This is only between us.
This is just between us.
This is just between us.
Perfect.